All right. Welcome, folks. Welcome back to Larger, Freer, More Loving. As always, I'm Matt Levine.
I'm Dwight Lewis.
And last time we welcomed y'all back and talked about what Dwight and I have been doing for the last year that we haven't been recording episodes. We also talked a bit about some of the societal trends over the last year that have been causing concern for us and that have really been hitting our hearts as a way to lead into the things that we want to forefront in this second season of the show. Things like the role of emotion in racial justice and social justice work more broadly, concepts of transformation and revolution, and uplifting ways of being and knowing that are marginalized in our white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist world. And today we're lucky enough to have a scholar, public intellectual, and activist who's done wonderful work that touches on all of these, Dr. Myisha Cherry. Thanks for being here, Myisha. And we want to start by just giving you a chance to introduce yourself.
So I'm Aisha Cherry. I'm assistant professor of philosophy at the University of California here in Riverside, Southern California. It's hot today. It's 85 degrees in February. And I say that because I'm originally from the East Coast and I'm not used to being this hot in February. So I'm warm here in Southern California. I do work on emotions, attitudes in public and political life. I just came out with a book a couple of months ago called The Case for Rage, Why Anger is Essential to Anti-Racist Struggle. Before that, I had a collection of interviews that I did on my podcast and turned into a book. So it's called Unmuted: Conversations on Race, Prejudice, and Social Justice. And I have a forthcoming book coming out next year on forgiveness, tentatively entitled The Failures of Forgiveness.
Hey, okay.
Yeah,
okay,
right,
okay,
right.
Okay. So we're gonna plug this book one more time. Make sure you guys go out and buy The Case for Rage. And you started out, calling yourself, a scholar of emotions. I'm in cold Minneapolis, just the opposite of you. I think it is probably, I'm looking out there. I checked earlier today. It was 4 degrees.
Oh my goodness. Hence your sweatshirt and my t-shirt.
I know. I got a beanie on. I do have shorts on, but it's because that's all I know. I'm from Florida, y'all know. And so it's hard for me up here. I've been here 6 months.
You went outside with shorts on?
No.
Okay. I just want to be clear. Okay,
all
right.
No. But people here all wear sweatpants inside. And I like my legs to be free, I'm from Florida. But I'm here in Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota right now. And we had a tragedy this week. Mr. Amir Locke, a 22-year-old Black man, was murdered by the cops. And of course, we mourn for his family and for the Black communities around the globe. The day after his death, or really his murder, the mayor and the sheriff had a press conference, which a Black woman, Miss Armstrong, interrupted with some rage. And we're going to play a little bit of it now. Then we're going to have Myisha give some of her thoughts on it afterwards.
When it's a threat.
Chief Huffman, no, hold on. Yeah. Chief Huffman, no, do not. Okay, I'm not a threat. I don't have a gun. Okay, don't treat me like I'm a threat. This is what I would call the anatomy of a cover-up. This is unacceptable. I'm sorry, it is. When I agreed to work with you on the work group, we talked about the importance of transparency and accountability. And here, what we are seeing is business as usual. And you know this, Amelia. You know this, Jacob. I don't know how you guys slept that night. I couldn't sleep at night. Tears from a mother's perspective, thinking about what happened. I saw the picture of Amir. He looks like a boy. My son is 17 years old. He has slept on his friends' couches for sleepovers. So we cannot sit here and whitewash this and pretend that it's okay. You knew that I was not going to stand for police violence and a push for accountability, yet you asked me to be a part of the work group. And I knew what I thought I was signed up for. This isn't what I signed up for. I understand if you're not comfortable having me continue to co-chair. That's your prerogative. I signed up to help bring recommendations because we're tired of being killed. We're tired of the cover-ups. We're tired of the excuses. And to hide behind the St. Paul Police Department The deadliest police force in the state of Minnesota is unacceptable. You all had no business agreeing to carry out a warrant, and now you're claiming that's part of their investigation. You don't know. Well, why the hell did you all sign up to do this in the first place? There was a homicide that happened at 1 something in the morning on Hennepin Avenue. Someone was killed, and then the person drove away in a black SUV. They're still at large in Minneapolis, potentially a threat to residents. But you all go do something for St. Paul police, and now you're trying to hide behind that decision. It's not acceptable. We are ready for change. When the people voted to re-elect you, Jacob, they not only showed that they wanted to see a new leader, right? Not saying you're not the person who got reelected, you got reelected. But what they were expecting is a new beginning. That's why they gave you more power and authority. So that is what we want to see as the residents of Minneapolis. We don't want to see cover-ups. We don't want to see whitewashing. People are asking very simple questions that have still not been answered. Amelia, you're saying you want to be the chief? Then act like it. Demonstrate integrity. Don't cover up for what those cops did. If they knew that the kid had a gun as he started waking up, say, drop your weapon. They didn't do that. One cop opened fire and took the life of a child who was trying to go back into his blanket. Any mom can see what happened there. So I can't tolerate the whitewashing. I'm sorry, y'all. We can't do this. I know you have your narrative. I know you have your script. And no, you guys didn't personally go shoot somebody. But you do have the opportunity to make it right, to talk about the fact that you changed the no-knock warrant policy. Where's the evidence of that? That wasn't present on what happened to Amir Locke. So if I'm going to be the co-chair of this group, I'm expecting strong leadership, I'm expecting integrity, and I'm expecting accountability. Yes. You guys aren't going to waste my goddamn time. And I don't care, you guys had your security trying to stop me. I can be used to come speak the truth about what needs to happen, but when it's time to call out these inconsistencies, these inaccuracies, the lack of information, I got to sit in the back or even not even be invited. I'm not here for it. We fought too long, too hard. There's people in jail, including Cortez Rice, trying to get the court to show what's happening in the courtroom so people can see what's going on. People have put their lives on the line because we're ready for change. So we're expecting from this point forward for you guys to do something different. I'm not playing. We're not here for it. We're not here for it. I'm only committed to working on this work group if you all are committed to being honest and transparent and not covering up the bullshit. Thank you.
I mean, I'm watching it, and immediately I'm thinking about Brittany Cooper's. I know it's only right that I talk about my book, but I come around a tradition of Black feminists who've written on anger. So I'm thinking about Brittany Cooper's book that came out a couple of years ago, and it's called Eloquent Rage. And she makes a distinction between something that she distinguishes between eloquent rage and elegant rage. So eloquent rage is it's articulate. It's of course it's furious. It's focused on an addressing a particular injustice. It's bold, but it's not elegant. So it's not going to sound good to everyone's ears. It's not going to, I mean, she used the language of whitewashing. It's not going to feel comfortable for people to hear it. It's going to speak the truth. And it's not articulated in order for people to feel good about it. And when I see that, I see a perfect image of eloquent rage. And it also flies against kind of stereotypes that we have, that when someone is angry, then they are completely irrational and out of control. And we see kind of a perfect picture of one can speak out of a particular emotion and be articulate, get to the point. I mean, she had like 10 premises leading us to a conclusion. It was convincing. It was illuminating. But the reason why we felt it, and the reason why people in the audience felt it, is because it was seasoned and peppered, not only just with passion and love, but with anger. And so when I just see that, I just see not only her as being an example of this, of what is called eloquent rage, but so many other Black women that I've encountered, even my own mother, but just people who are just frustrated and tired. and want to speak truth to power, it looks just like that. I'm also reminded of, one of the things that I kind of articulate in my book, and one of the things that I'm drawn to in regards to what anger and what it responds to. Anger responds to an injustice. It responds to a wrongdoing. And particularly what is interesting about anger, it draws our attention to something that has gone wrong in the world that in some ways can be obscured and erased, not just merely forgotten, but sanitized and whitewashed. And the power of anger to kind of not just illuminate, but bring our attention to something that we want to ignore, that we want to paint over, is a powerful thing, particularly kind of anti-racist anger that I'm describing in my book, and that I'll also see kind of depicted in that video. I mean, it's the power to illuminate. I mean, what she calls out is exactly what I'm suggesting that anger can do. Make us aware of stuff that we perhaps were not aware of. Makes us aware of things that we perhaps want to ignore, and to call us to account. So it's to call them out the injustice, but it's also kind of a challenge of it all, right? So it's not just I'm going to expose you, but I'm exposing you so you can see yourself, and so that you can do something in response to that exposure, particularly when it's bringing attention to kind of inconsistency or hypocrisy, right? So one said, as she kind of highlights, you say that you are committed to this, but you're doing this. I mean, that's Baldwin, right? In his criticism of America, right? You say that you're about this. You have this narrative, you have this picture of who you take America to be. But I'm here to tell you that it is not the case. But I am calling you to be better, to live up to the standards that you said that you articulate. I mean, this is very much what Douglas also talked about in his 4th of July speech. I mean, this is a tradition of this eloquent rage. And it's one of the reasons why I make a case for it, right? What would a world look like, particularly in a non-ideal world where it just consists of so much injustice? What would a world look like without that kind of injustice? How could we see that calling out of injustice? How could we see without that kind of anger, right? How could we live up to the standards that we say we have, despite hypocrisy, without that kind of anger? How can we feel what someone else feels without that kind of anger? How can we be motivated to do something about injustice without that kind of anger? And that's one of the reasons why I make a case for it. So I salute that sister. I salute everybody who's hurting and who's fired up to do something in response to that particular hurt. But it starts with exposing the lies and challenge us to do much better. And there's nothing like an angry Black woman to kind of usher us into that transformation that we so desperately need.
Hey, wow. That was absolutely fire. I'm just going to start with that. But you brought up Baldwin, and I have a question here, but I'm like not going to, and I'm going to this question about Baldwin. So Baldwin talks about whiteness being trapped in history, at least in The Fire Next Time. And so I'm wondering, do you think that whiteness can actually be like, can pull itself out of the trapping of history, or can see itself, right? Can untangle itself from like avoiding actually stepping into the vulnerability of seeing itself, right? Do you actually think that whiteness can do that?
So I don't think whiteness can do it, because the very definition of what we take whiteness to be is this attachment to a particular kind of historical narrative. But I think white people who've been seduced by whiteness can resist that seduction and come out of that to finally see the truth, right? So whiteness is going to do what whiteness is going to do. But the question is, are we going to free ourselves from whiteness? Right? And it takes an individual that is willing to free themselves from that, right? So that's why, when Baldwin writes, he's not speaking to concepts, he's speaking to individuals, right? He's speaking to individual lives, right? Calling people comrades, my Black comrades. He says at the very end of The Fire Next Time, when he says, calling, for relatively Black conscious folks and white conscious folks, if we don't do our duty, then there's going to be a fire. Like, he's calling out individuals to free themselves from this kind of seduction in order to bring about change. So whiteness is going to do what whiteness is going to do. But I think white people can free themselves from that seduction. And you can only free yourself from that seduction by being challenged to do so, by being exposed to do so. by being encouraged to do so, by being motivated to do so. And that's a constant work because the seduction is real.
Real.
Right? The seduction is real.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that response. And I feel you and agree with you completely. So we are going to move on to your book now a little bit. All right, we're going to move on a little bit. And really, I'm not even going to ask this first question isn't even going to be about your book. So you're coming off this book tour. How are you doing? How was the tour?
So behind the scenes, I said I was tired, but I'm not supposed to think I'm tired on air, but yeah, I'm tired.
Yeah, you can be tired.
No, it was an amazing ride. I mean, you work on something so long, and I got interested in the topic right before I went to grad school. So this was like 2012, and it kind of came out of, just witnessing what was happening in response to Trayvon Martin's murder and kind of the rise of Black Lives Matter. And so it's been something that I've been thinking about for a very, very, very long time. And being able to kind of, hone my craft as a writer and as a thinker, and being able to put it in book form was just a long journey. And couldn't wait to get it out. And I thought that it would come out sometime before last year. And particularly when the protests were happening in 2020, I felt, oh my God, I wish my book was out. Oh my goodness. And then you just realize when you wake up to the news this week or last week, and you realize the same old, that unfortunately, the book is not speaking to a particular moment, but if we live in a white supremacist patriarchal society, every moment, unfortunately, is a moment for the book to speak to. So I'm happy that the book is out, that it's, finally able to do the kind of work that I've been wanting it to do. And, it's 5 months out, so it's still doing that particular work, but I'm so happy that people can now, buy it in the stores. People who are angry right now can go pick it up and try to figure out what they can do with this anger that they have. People who are critical of anger is out. And then they can pick up the book that can kind of lessen some of their anxieties and some of their worries about it. So I'm happy that it's out. It's been well received so far. I get an opportunity to talk to students, talk to people who are not academics. I think that's been the joy for me. To talk to people who are not academics, to talk to activists. And the conversation is still going. So I'm just excited that it's out and I can, kind of talk about it. It's been a lot of work, but I wouldn't have it any kind of way.
Yeah. It's out. Go pick it up. The Case for Rage. Sorry, I'm gonna keep plugging it.
Please do.
I'm gonna keep plugging it. So in the introduction, you talk about the influence of the summer of 2019 and teaching. I really want to focus on this teaching aspect. How does your teaching actually impact your research? And how do you have anything to say to junior scholars about connecting these two aspects of academic work?
Yeah, so particularly we have a tendency to, use a kind of phrase on the ground, right? And usually typically when we're referring to that, particularly when we're in the ivory towers, we're simply talking, we're referencing people who do kind of activist work, who are part of organizations, who actually go out and protest. And if you're not an activist yourself, the closest people that are on the ground that you have in your life as an academic are your students.
Yes.
Right. So to me, my students are not my customers. My students are my co-citizens who are much more active than I am, right? Who know much more than I know about certain kinds of things. And if anything, they are who I think with, and who I respond to. They are my interlocutors, as well as my audience in some ways. So teaching for me has always been very much connected. I mean, I find it, I always talk to my writer friends, and I always say, my writer friends who are not scholars, I always say to them, you're missing out. I mean, you don't teach. I mean, how did you come up with something to write? I mean, how do you test out your ideas? How do you know what other people are thinking? I just don't know how people do it. And I'm particularly talking about young people.
Yeah.
I'm particularly talking about certain demographics. So here in California, most of my students are first generation students. I work at a predominantly Hispanic institution. So they're coming from a very different background. And prior to this, I worked in the CUNY system as well. So you got people of color working in New York City. Living in New York City. So it's a very, those are my people. But also I'm getting older. And so there's generational gaps. And, when I think about who I'm writing for, they're, and who I'm in conversation with, they are who I'm in conversation with. So the way in which I tailor my classes, I think about them in mind. The things that I cover, the readings that I cover, the references, all that stuff. They are what make my classes. So they are very important to my scholarship and the ways I think as a thinker. Because I think with them. I even give them credit, if you notice in the book, giving shout outs to my grad students and all that stuff for the acknowledgements, because they are the focus group. Do I got this right? Because y'all know, they got their hands on the pulse of things, and they're also engaged in the work. And so without them, I can't really be effective at what I write about and how I think. So they make me a better citizen, but they also make me a better thinker in that particular regard. So when I was thinking about, particularly when the book was about to come out, and I kind of go back and kind of make some edits for the introduction, it happened to COVID-19. And I was just witnessing just a disproportionate impact that COVID had on my students. And that it's still continuing to have on my student because of who they are racially and who they are socially and economically. And thinking about, when we went online in early 2020, it was also a lot of protests going on in the spring of that year. And so I was teaching a course on social philosophy, and the theme of the course was struggle and protest and struggle. So we were talking about these things, but they were the one going to marches. I was too scared to go to a march. You weren't gonna catch me out there. I wasn't gonna get COVID. I'm old. That's my consideration. But for them, it's like, I'm willing to risk it all. Right. Yeah. And so these are the people that I was in conversation with. And so as a result of being in conversation with them and just thinking about a lot of these issues, they made the book richer and much more relevant and made me just better. One of the things I learned, we were all struggling together, but I came out just a better person and a better scholar and a better co-citizen because I went with it through them. And as a result of that, I think I have a greater respect for what we do, or at least what we can do in the classroom and in relationship to students. And I think it changed my perspective of how I see my relationships with my students. But out of that context, just hearing them struggle, seeing them struggle, talking with them, it adds some freshness and some insight. And as a result, I think the book is a little bit more relevant because of that experience that I had with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we really appreciate that. Also, I love this idea of students as co-citizens. I think this is something that most academics do not treat their students this way, and it's very much a top-down model. And this idea of actually interacting and being on the ground with them, literally sitting in the dirt, is beautiful. I think we need more of this. I want to ask another question, Matt. I'm gonna, I'm sorry, that I do this, but what do these? So and this is a selfish question. So I'm at UMN, predominantly it's a PWI. I'm teaching a class right now, knowledge and society. And I'm like, the struggle is that I have not one Black person in my class, right? And so how does that interlocuting, how does that co-citizenship help, at least in relationship to being on the ground, right, with those students? And
here's also the thing, students will surprise you, right? So, one of the things about being in conversation with them, what they have a tendency to show you is that we're not who you thought that we were, who we thought For example, I have a friend of mine who is currently at an Ivy League, and she had her assumptions about what the Ivy League experience would be. Mm-hmm. And she was coming from a public system, a state school, and she was dealing with one group, and she was like, "Oh God, I got to deal with these kinds of students." And she goes to the Ivy League institution and come to find out that those kinds of students were students of color. Mm-hmm. Were students who came from a certain socioeconomic background. And so she was just surprised. She thought she would be getting kind of a spoiled brat, kind of privileged students, and that's the opposite of what she got. And that's easy when we think about it kind of in visually what we can see, but I think even white students will fool you, right? I mean, here's the thing, and I'm born from Audre Lorde here, is that, listen, we all come out of difference, right? So just because everybody's white in the classroom doesn't mean that everybody's the same. People have arrived in that moment from very different backgrounds, stories, histories, and if you let them tell it, then you would know. And I think the interesting thing, even when you're dealing with that kind of what may seem like a homogeneous kind of space, if you talk to them just a little bit, you'll find out that they come from very different situations. And it's not to say that like you want to capitalize on like the struggle.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that we're human beings. We all struggle, and people will surprise you. And it's that surprise that we kind of learn from each other. So your diversity may look a bit different than my diversity, but the human struggle, it is what it is. And if you allow students to tell you what it is, then you come out better in the long run, right? So it may not be the case that one of your students sold drugs to get through school. Okay. Right. But I don't want to say that that's the only story. That's the only story of struggle.
Yeah.
Right? We all got a whole bunch of struggles, whole bunch of ways in which we've come to knowledge and understanding. And I think if you make space for that and don't get caught up in the fact, I wish this class was diverse in the ways in which I want it to be diverse. They will surprise you and everybody will come out better as a result.
Yeah. I definitely agree that they've been surprising me. The best, and I'm not gonna lie, like even I was at UCF before this, and even there, I had kids, whiling at protests, like they're at the front, like, I've seen videos. I'm like, I hope you're not getting arrested like right now. Like it's like in the same way that we videotape Proud Boys or whatever. I'm like, you're gonna be one of those that is in a video gets arrested.
I'm pretty sure one of your students is an anarchist.
One of
those.
It's like,
you'll be surprised how radical even the whitest of white students can be. I'm telling you.
I agree. Put a mask on though, my girl. Put a mask on. Like help yourself a little.
Right. And you'll also be surprised that those who look diverse in appearance may not have that diverse radical ideology.
Speak on that a little bit.
So I mean, I've entered into spaces where I had assumptions about, oh, they look this color, and coming to find out they may look this color racially, but they kind of have this kind of non-progressive politics that you got to teach them in some ways out of. And I found those to be
some of the
emotionally draining courses because you got to deal with it, like what is happening here? What is happening here? So diversity can look very different in very different ways, and students will always have a tendency to surprise you. Dwight, you mentioned the question about junior scholars.
Yeah.
And I got a sense I didn't answer that, partly because I forgot the question. But can you? I don't want to not answer that. So can you throw that back at me?
Yeah, so I was just like, how can, and I think you've spoken to it a little bit, especially because I'm a junior scholar and we've been going back and forth at it.
We junior scholars. We don't got tenure yet.
You ain't got tenure yet?
I'm 4 years out. This is my 4th year.
Lord Jesus. I'm about to throw it at you anyways. You tenure, you're associate. I'm giving you it, you got it from me, even though it don't matter. But it's like, the question was, how do we connect, our research and teaching? But I think you've shown it already. I think you've already shown it, and we've pushed on it. And you done came back swinging.
Yeah, I love this. I love this idea of students as co-citizens, and you talking about the relationship between your work and protest and struggle. Because actually, here on the ground in Portland, in some protest communities I'm a part of, your book has actually been shared in our text chain.
There's a chapter dedicated to Portland.
Right? Yeah. So in the book, though, you make this really, really compelling case for the importance to anti-racist struggle of this particular type of rage that you call Lordian rage. So what is Lordian rage? How does it differ from other types of rage? And what is so important about it for movements toward a racially just world that those of us in Portland here are sharing your book around in our circles?
Yeah, so when I was going back to 2012, when I got interested in the topic, not only as a human kind of experience, but as an intellectual experience, when I was looking at the feminist literature on emotions and oppression, I noticed that a lot of feminist scholars were referencing Audre Lorde. And I want to admit, in 2012, I had no idea who Audre Lorde was. I knew she wasn't a philosopher, but I knew that these white feminist philosophers just citing this woman. And I'm like, who is this? First of all, when white women or just white scholars in general start citing a Black person who has nothing to do with philosophy, you need to go seek out that primary source ASAP. So I'm like, who is this woman? So I did my research, and the essay that they were heavily citing was The Uses of Anger. That's the name of the essay. And I read the essay, and I was just blown away. It's also those moments where you realize that, like, okay, this person's written on this topic. There's nothing more that I can add or say. Like, you kind of get that initial, like, this person said it all. But I read the essay, and I was like, okay, now I know why people are referencing her. So when I was thinking about, just thinking about kind of what I wanted to say in relationship to the whole general project of anger and oppression, I had to give credit to where credit was due. I think a lot of my thinking about anger comes from inspiration from that essay, from her work. And so I call the anger that I'm defending in the book Lordian Rage, after Audre Lorde, feminist scholar, poet. And it's basically not only just giving due credit to that essay, but the way in which I describe the rage comes from that essay. So one of the things that I say is that Lordian Rage, this kind of anti-racist anger, is directed at racism, racist attitudes. If you're familiar with the essay, she talks about that at the very first page of the essay, right? She says, my anger in response to racism is directed at blah, 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 right? It's also an anger in which one aims to change the state of affairs, right? And she talks about this. I mean, it's like on the fourth page of the essay, particularly if you're doing the Woman's Quarterly 1981 version and not the Sister Outsider version, where she talks about, we aim our anger at change. More specifically, she talks about radical transformation of our world. And I was like, all right. It's also the way in which I describe it. This kind of anger it has what I call kind of an inclusive perspective. So you're not just concerned about remedying justice for oneself, or getting some kind of due for oneself, but for everyone. And this comes at the very end of the essay when Audre Lorde when she's talking about third world women and being in solidarity with them. And she basically says, I'm not free. We're not free, until every woman is free, right? That inclusive perspective. So that, kind of that inspiration. So when I start chapter 1, trying to laying out what I take Lordian Rage to be and how it differs from other kinds of anger that can arise in the political injustice context, I kind of do kind of like a comparison based on those kinds of features. So once again, I say, hey, this kind of rage directed at racism, racist attitudes, not scapegoats, right? So there's a rage that I call rogue rage that is directed at scapegoats. Right? So as opposed to being mad at the government for their unjust policies, they're mad at policies that benefit a certain kind of group that the government just seems to favor for one particular policy, such as immigrants, for example. Immigrants are coming to take our jobs. That's not how it works, right? Is directed at change, which is very different from another kind of anger that I talk about called white rage, in which it's directed at hate and elimination of the other. It's what we saw in Charlottesville. It's what we saw on the January 6th in the Capitol, right? It has an inclusive perspective. As I said before, it's, you're thinking about everybody getting free, which is very different from a kind of rage that I borrow from Bell Hooks that's called Narcissistic Rage. That in all likelihood, one might think it has the same features of Lordian Rage, but that person's not concerned about getting freedom for all. That person just wants freedom for oneself, or people that has the kind of privilege that they have. So you can imagine a kind of well-do Black person who has a certain kind of economic status, who the police arrest. And they're mad, not because this is a sign of systemic injustice, but they're mad because they're supposed to be the exception of such treatment, right? Given their particular status. One ought not to treat them like all those other poor Black people who's not doing anything with their lives. So that's a narcissistic kind of version. So that's that's how I kind of see Lordian Rage at its core, from a conceptual kind of perspective, different from those other kinds. And you got to think about this: if it has these particular features, contrasted with those destructive kinds, which I think if people are nervous about anger, one of the things that I say, people are really nervous about those other kinds: rogue rage, white rage, narcissistic rage. And that's the kind of rage that I'm defending, given the features that I talked about. But I basically suggest, well, given the features that I talked about, one can imagine the kind of action that one is motivated to engage in, right? So if your rage has the feature of, I'm going to target towards scapegoats and I'm aiming to eliminate them, we can imagine the kind of actions that you're going to participate in. You're going to do a Charlottesville. You're going to do a January 6th, right? You're going to do internet trolling, right? You're not going to, I'm going to form a movement called Black Lives Matter, in which I'm all for Black lives, and our whole purpose, we have, and you're not going to do that kind of thing. So Lordian Rage is going to lead us, given its features, it is likely to lead us to what I call kind of productive action. But I don't stop there. I mean, the rest of the book, one might say, well, I could have just stopped at chapter 1. The rest of the book kind of talks about, why this kind of anger is essential. Why is it important? What kind of work is it actually doing in anti-racist struggle? And I say this in brief, and if we want to go in more detail, we can. So the rest of the chapters of the book basically says, well, the significant thing about this particular anger is that it ascribes value to lives of the marginalized. And this comes out of kind of a history in which we say that emotions, particularly anger, is a way of valuing other people. That you can't get angry about something that you don't value, that you don't think is warranted of a certain kind of respect, right? And just, particularly in the anti-racist context, when you see that certain lives are being disrespected and not being treated well, when you are angry, that's in response to the fact that you're valuing, not only are you engaged in a valuing practice, but you're basically saying, without even saying it, that these lives are valuable and deserve certain kinds of respect. And that's a radical thing to say in a white supremacist context, right? That's a radical thing to say when people say, well, all lives matter, right? Ascribing value to lives that have been mistreated is a radical thing to say and a revolutionary thing and a needed thing to say in the context of continual and systemic oppression, right? Another thing I say that Lordian Rage does, and I try to kind of do this kind of briefly, is that it motivates productive action. And basically go into kind of some social psychology and some neuroscience to kind of back this up. And then I kind of say, well, this explains why people like Ida B. Wells, Black woman, who advocated against anti-lynching all of her life. Sojourner Truth, a woman who wasn't even educated, born a slave, but could tell it like it is, who had eloquent rage, could do the kind of work that she was engaged in. So it kind of helps us make sense of the motivating features of it. And also why it's not incompatible with love, but it's very much compatible with love. So I try to get us to reimagine Martin Luther King and his anger and his love, et cetera, et cetera. And then I also kind of talk about how another reason why it's important for anti-racist struggle is that just by having the anger, one can resist what I call kind of racist or racial rules in the world. You can do it in a protest, but you can also do it on your job, and you can also do it at home alone. But you can engage in a kind of radical revolutionary practice, because just by having anger, you say I matter, you say they matter. Just by having anger, you say white people are not the only people who have a right to anger. I take that back, right? I kind of, I have a right to express myself, not just express myself, but to proclaim my indignation and my response to the wrongdoing in the world. So that's kind of the case that I'm making. So I'm making a case for Lordian Rage and saying that because it does the things that I talked about and has the features that I kind of described, that's why it's important. And that's why we shouldn't get rid of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on this this idea that you mentioned, that Lordian rage is a type of inclusive rage, because you say in the book, you make it clear that your work on Lordian rage is not about Black rage in particular, but it's about the anger of all people of color and their allies directed at racism and white supremacy. That said, you do have this awesome paper coming out in the newest issue of Critical Philosophy of Race on Black rage in particular. and very, very close to our hearts here. It's about James Baldwin's work on Black Rage. So is there anything from this piece or your thoughts on James Baldwin's work on rage that you think would be good to bring into the conversation here?
Right. So one of the things I like to say is that, listen, we can say Lordian rage is kind of like an umbrella of like rage in response or anger in response to racism. And then you could just say, well, Black rage will fit under the umbrella, right? Describing that particular rage as experienced by Black folk in general, right? So we can make room for that. But I want to, as you kind of laid out, Black rage is Black people. And so if I were to call it the case for Black rage, it's just, oh, everybody else go away. South Asian, we don't care about your racism. Asian Americans who were being beaten up in the street last week, oh, we can talk about your anger in another context, right? The kind of anger that I'm talking about is a response to racism. That's what throughout the book, I talk about very, very different racial groups. It's not to say that there's nothing distinctive about anti-Black racism, right? Which, or nothing distinct about, what does it mean to be an Asian American angry in this moment, particularly last year? It's a very different kind of experience than it would be for Black rage. So I want to allow for that. And so, but Lordian rage is an umbrella term in which we can make room for these other, how it's manifested in different kinds of communities, given one's positionality and one's history, right? So Black rage, it's interesting. As much as I'm in love with Audre Lorde, I don't do history. So Dwight, you do early modern. I've never been like a figure person. I always looked at you guys as weirdos, no offense, of how you can just focus on one person. How you can focus on one person's life. Everything is everything is lime and it's lime. And I always thought, well, that's strange. That's interesting. Until I fell in love.
Oh, with Baldwin.
James Baldwin and Audre Lorde. And I honestly feel that like, I'm so sympathetic now to you historians, to you intellectual historians. I'm so sympathetic because there's something about, it is not to say these individuals are perfect individuals. I mean, that's not what I'm claiming. But you feel that there's something about them in their biographies that just connect with you in a very distinct way. And there's something about the way that they think and the way that they thought that just does something for you, in which you just want to read all their stuff and you want to think with them about certain kinds of things and think with them in the present moment because they're no longer here with us, right? So now I totally get it. I totally get it. And as I indicated with Audre Lorde in relationship to the book, I mean, James Baldwin is constantly on my mind, constantly on my mind. And particularly when I was just really thinking about Black rage, I was really thinking about Baldwin. So I noticed, a lot of things that I've read on Baldwin in relationship to the emotions. I was always surprised that no one ever wrote anything about him in relationship to Black rage, particularly when he's been described as angry all the time. Angry and bitter. I mean, that's something that was said to him, with William Buckley, his debate foe. And even later on in his life, people just thought, oh, he's just a bitter man. And they didn't really take his later essays kind of seriously. So The Fire Next Time is something that we praise. And people admit that he was angry then. And then there's a very different kind of narrative that we give him when things just don't turn out politically, and what is one's political perspective and one's emotions in that particular regard. So people love the hopeful, redeeming, angry because white people will now wake up Baldwin, but not, you guys, you guys just not getting your shit together kind of Baldwin, right? And that anger. So I really wanted to I felt that it was room to kind of think with him about his emotion and about Black rage in general. And so the piece is just trying to make sense. What is Baldwin's moral psychology of anger, right? How did he think about anger? What did he think about in relationship to his uses? So one of the things that I kind of talk about in the piece, a lot of things that he describes about his kind of first experience, semi-first experience in New Jersey in relationship to anger, and kind of what that experience is, what that experience was for him. And, for those who are familiar, he's working in the power plants in Jersey, and he's going to these restaurants, very different. I mean, Jersey, for those who know East Coast, Jersey, we wish it wasn't close, but it's close to New York. So you think it wouldn't be a difference in like culture, you know what I mean? But everybody know who lives in New York that Jersey is a very different culture. Anyway, so Baldwin is like going through the streets and going to restaurants, and he's being mistreated and, can't be served. And he's basically had enough. And he basically goes off. He's like, the rage just builds up over him. He basically goes off. And he basically describes what that experience is like. And here's the thing. He thought that he would never be treated the way in which Black folks from the South would be treated. I mean, he goes to narcissistic stuff, right? You were talking about, right? He's very honest. He's very honest. That's another thing I like about Baldwin. He's honest.
He is honest.
He's very honest about that experience, right? But he has this experience where the anger just builds up, and he describes sort of a picture of water at a waitress who doesn't want to serve him. And he's surprised that he was able to get out with his life. And his description of that emotion was just very impactful for me. He describes it kind of, what happens to his body, what happens to his mind. And, but even in the midst of that, a lot of people will have a tendency to describe that, he was engaged in kind of a blind rage. It was not blind rage. I mean, he was able to like assess and evaluate. He knew everything that happened as he reflected back. So he's very much aware. And so when I think about Black rage, I think that provides a good opportunity in thinking with Baldwin about what Black rage is. If people think, Black folks are out of their minds when they're angry at racism, they're out of their minds. They're not thinking right. They're being possessed by this emotion or whatever. And it's like, no, Baldwin teaches us that yes, it can be bodily. As you know the video of the sister, you can hear the trembles in her voice. I pick up on these cues a lot. You can tell the bodily response that's going on in her body, right? She's having a physiological and phenomenal experience in that moment, right? But her agency, I mean, she has full control in that moment, right? And that's what Baldwin just reminds me. As much as we like to think that Black folks are, by definition, irrational beasts, and he reminds us that you can have these experiences of racism and be very much aware of what's happening, very much rational, very much in control of one's agential capacities. So that was just a starting point into kind of mining throughout his essays, kind of what he thought about it. And this is something that we discussed off air. One of the things I also address is how does he think you get this rage? Do you have it simply because you are Black? Mm-hmm. And Baldwin says, no, you don't. Right. And it goes back to an autobiographical note. He talks about how he's going to a friend's house to give him the suit that he wore to Martin Luther King's funeral. And he's talking to his friend, and they're talking about Vietnam. And he noticed that he's upset about what's happening, but his friend is not upset. And his friend is using language like, oh, we need to figure out what we're going to do about Vietnam. And he's like, we, like, you the government, you're the white politician. And he's amazed. What he notices that his stepdaughter does have a kind of anger, right? Going back to young folks, because young folk have their fingers on the pulse. It may not be fully developed or fully kind of like theorized, but they know what's going on. But he knows his stepdaughter does indeed have a sense of what's happening, and she's, angry in response. But his friend doesn't feel anything, right? And, basically his conclusion is like, he doesn't feel anything because he's not thinking anything. He's not examining anything. And throughout Baldwin's essay, he talks about this. To be angry at what's happening in one's world comes about because one has examined the world to be what it is. And you can be Black all you want, but Blackness doesn't make you, by definition, have Black rage, right? Because you can be a Black person, goes back to the lies that we were talking about, thinking everything is good, thinking about America is perfect in every way. Thinking about if you get arrested, if you get beat up by the cops, that was your doing. You didn't comply. You didn't whatever. That if you're still poor, it's not because of systemic injustice and structural injustice. It's because you're not taking advantage of the opportunities that you had that we didn't have when we were in slavery. People have that particular narrative. That Black person may be Black, but for Baldwin, that person is never going to have what we call Black rage because they haven't examined America for what it is. So it comes about as a result of examination. He used a lot of Shakespearean language. The unexamined life is not worth living. He cites Socrates in that sense, because it's only through that examination that one can even, be angry and thus challenge the world to be and to become better. So yeah, I'm excited about that piece, for people to read that piece.
Yes, we are too. And thank you for that. And I want to bring together a couple different threads that came up there, right? So I love this idea of making space, opening room in the academy for talking about Black rage, talking about Lordian rage, talking about emotions, and want to come back to this idea of students having their finger on the pulse. Mm-hmm. So Dwight and I are always talking with each other about how philosophy and the academy generally are just so hostile to emotion and lived experiences. but you've just taken that head on in all of your work. And one of the things we're hoping to do this season is to try to provide some advice for undergrad and grad students who want to do that kind of work and want to do that kind of work to actually improve people's lives. So do you have any advice for undergrad or grad students who want to center emotion, want to make room for emotion and lived experience?
You know, I'm going to answer this question the long way around. Because this question was recently asked to me in a Q&A of a book talk by another Black philosopher. I think he kind of had a sense of what my answer was, but he was, he wanted the audience to listen. And it's interesting because I am who I am because of how I was raised. And so my narrative is not so different than what I'm currently doing, whatever that doing is. And I kind of make that clear and be a little bit more specific about what I'm referring to. So I grew up, my mother was a community organizer. And she was just also a woman. I mean, she's one of those women that you went to in the community that if you needed help, she's going to give it to you. Now, my mother was physically handicapped all of her life. She was confined to a wheelchair all of her life, foster child. So she knew what it meant to be discarded and unloved. She also knew what it meant to be discriminated against on a whole bunch of spheres. And I don't know how she did it, but she was just able to live a life of love as a result of that. And she raised me in church, and the church that we went to was very much community orientated. So it was a lot of activist work. It was a very progressive church. And so a lot of my politics I learned, that was the first place I learned politics and what it means to be a person of service. And so even while I was at that church, I was doing work for the homeless. We were just doing a lot of community work. That was my life. When I went to undergrad, I played basketball. And so the first 2 years of my life, for those who was a student athlete, you realize that's the only thing you're gonna do. You're gonna play sports and maybe go to class. And I realized that that's not the kind of life I wanted to live. And so this last 2 years of my junior, my senior year, I became very active in campus life. And so I was the president of certain community organizations and, SGA and all this stuff. And, I felt like I was continuing something that I learned when I was younger. I went to grad school, I got a master's in divinity. I thought I was gonna be a religion professor. And I was gonna be a religion professor. And then I'm in seminary for 3 years, and I realized, they just talk to each other. I need to go back on the ground. And so I spent after divinity school, I spent 10 years working in the nonprofit sector, all throughout New York City. But I was adjuncting on the weekends. And then it just got to the point that I felt like, man, I'm really loving this adjunct life, but not like that. Maybe I should go back to school. And one of the things that I was concerned about in going back to school is that I felt like all this work that I was doing, this community work that I was doing, I wouldn't be able to do it when I was focused on getting my PhD. I moved to Chicago at the time, and I was just trying to figure out how can I have my foot in both worlds, but yet be responsible to the school thing. I'm the first person to graduate from college. It ain't a game. So if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it right and get out too. So it was at my first year of grad school, it's 2014, that I decided to do a podcast. And the reason why I did a podcast, and I give a shout out in my book about this, is I was working with some formerly incarcerated students who I was teaching philosophy to. And this was my way to kind of stay in touch with them. We can still do philosophy, but y'all gonna check out these episodes that I'm doing with these cool philosophers. So that's why the podcast is what it is, like a radio. I want to impress those students. So in some ways, the podcast has always been a way for me to kind of continue to connect with people that I felt that I left behind when I went back to get my PhD. And so I came into as a grad student, wanted to stay connected to that community that I quote unquote left. And then, and so the research kind of took its own kind of direction. I felt like my dissertation was on forgiveness. And I felt that I was just upset about the press conferences that I was hearing with reporters constantly asking these Black women after their sons and husbands were killed by the police, can you find it in your heart to forgive? And I felt that that question was problematic. And every time I went into the philosophy research to try to figure out why it was problematic, no one ever asked that question before. And I'm like, well, if not me, then who? And so my dissertation is a project that originates out of what I was seeing in press conferences with Black people. And I was being true to myself and the questions that I wanted to ask. And I just found first of all, an advisor that was sympathetic to that particular project. But I found I was able to hone a kind of skill set in which I can ask those underground questions in ways that can satisfy requirements to get a dissertation. And don't tell me that at the beginning, because now I know what to do going forward. I know that if philosophy is a response to our lives as human beings, that is not just in response to some lives that we all have, as I already articulated, we have diverse experiences. I just got to find a way to ask those questions and to answer those in a certain kind of way. And so, my work presently and futurely, if I have anything to say about it, is very much connected to, I think, questions that I know my aunt and my sister is asking in these moments. And I'm just trying to articulate them in a very different way. And one of the things I love about the topic of emotions, I mean, for lots of people, I really believe that research topics that you're passionate about, you don't find them, they find you. That's just my motto. I mean, you got to write stuff for like your whole life, particularly dissertation. It's like a 4 to 5 year project. If you don't have any kind of connection towards those in a very intimate way, you're not going to finish. And I think I look at research projects as kind of like falling in love. I mean, there's a lot of people to fall in love with, but you can't control who you really fall in love with. And the activity of love is an active work. I'm presently kind of thinking about a book by love. That's active work. But, that person it is what it is. And that research topic was just something about emotions. I can't explain it. It just really woke my brain up. It excited me. And I'm grateful because I find that it's a topic that I can talk to anybody about. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to go to college. I can talk about my sister. I can talk about forgiveness with my sister all day. And I love that. I can talk to a stranger on the street all day about anger, right? I love that. So I like the fact that the topics that I'm interested in does have this direct connection, not just to my people, but people in general, because we are people who are emotional beings. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. And just trying to stay true to their experiences and try not to be so abstract. But that's kind of how I think about my research project. I'm doing me, I guess, to answer your question a little bit more direct way. This is me. This is the only way I know how to do this. And I would say to undergrads thinking about going to grad school, grad students right now, be true to what excites you. Be true about what you're passionate towards. And you can still satisfy this kind of nerdy side of us. You can merge all those three together, and come out with brilliant projects that will resonate with people. Not all people. I'm not for everybody. I'm perfectly fine with that. But you can do it in ways that can resonate with people that can have an impact. And I think that one of the worst things that you can do is to try to model yourself, this kind of imposter syndrome crap, model yourself off of what a stereotypical philosopher is or scholar is. Those people are boring. And I say they're boring because if you're not being you, then you're being boring. Just be you. Find the research projects that you're interested in. Try to find models, whether that's in philosophy or not, that you can emulate yourself and be inspired by. But do the things that you're passionate about. Hone your craft as a scholar, because you got to do that. And you blend those things together, you'll never really work a day in your life. That's just how I think about it.
Myisha, I'm listening to your story, and I'm all about this idea of doing you, telling students doing them. But also I'm listening to this, and we share so much of the same story, a little bit similar.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in a church. I played football in college. I got involved my sophomore, junior year in the feminist club. I went to seminary.
Where did you go? Where'd you go for seminary?
I went to RTS, Reformed Theological Seminary.
Okay. I went to Howard.
Okay. So you did it right, better than me. Just the truth. Sorry.
It's you.
And then I read this. I was there for a year and a half. I read this. 3 days later, dropped out of seminary.
Oh my goodness.
And applied to PhD programs in philosophy, adjunct,
Wow.
subbed at in the like county school system, protested on the weekends. You were completely right about this, like having a good advisor that will advisors, I am gonna say that, advisors that allow you to really do what you want to do. Because I was a savage, I literally remember telling my advisor, either you can get on my side or you can get out of the way. And that's and for an advisor to be able to take that, I went back and apologized the next day. And I was like, I'm young, how young people are. But shout out to good advisors. Really, anyone that's listening, that's what you need. That's what you need. Roger Arieff, Justin Smith, also Catherine Sophia Bell, bad. I'm trying not to cuss on the podcast, but bad A's.
Can I just say something for 10 seconds? And what you just said is so important. I think as much as we're talking to students, we need to talk to advisors. Is that stop trying to remake people into your own image. That the best thing that we can do for students is allow them to do the things that they're passionate about and guide them and making sure that they're honing their skills to do the things that they're passionate about.
Yes.
And I think that's the best thing that we can do as mentors and advisees.
And I will say this, if you got an advisor that it's not allowing you to do that, that means you may need to step away and find someone else.
Right.
And don't be afraid. And if you need help, my email is open. So Myisha, we both had this ride. I'm sitting here in this Zoom room and I'm feeling your strength and resilience. So my last question, what feeds it? What feeds that strength and resilience in you?
I don't know if my ancestors' wildest dreams. I don't know that. But one of the things that I do know, my mother is no longer here with us. And I think about the kind of woman that she was, and the kind of resilient woman that she was. And I kind of learned from her life as an exemplar. There's just no excuses for me. I think, she was able to birth me and instill certain kinds of values inside of me. And I owe it to her and her legacy to do the very best that I can do with those values and that example. And I think when I think about what fuels me, there's certain kinds of traits that I have that I know I got it from my mama, right? This competitive edge, this chip on your shoulder, this resilience, this tenacity. I got that from a Black handicapped woman who was the foster child. And so, and I owe it to her legacy to do something with that. I'm also, like I said, the first person in my family to get a degree. And so I owe it to that legacy to do something with that. I also, as much as I'm kind of no longer religious traditionally, I still kind of believe in notions of, if I'm here, I'm gonna leave a legacy. Now, I don't know what's beyond here, but what I do know is that I'm gonna operate in what kind of purpose I've given to myself, and I'm gonna make the best out of it. And when I'm long and gone, someone will remember that I was here. And so that's what drives me. And when you have that kind of image and that big picture, obstacles that seems big are only small. Hindrances or haters or whatever, that stuff seems small in the larger scheme of things, and you realize that you're part of a great legacy and you're going to leave one for someone else. That even the journal rejections is okay, I'm not, I remember I got a journal rejection. I got a journal rejection. Be careful in the way in which I say this, because I've also been blessed. I would say that. I would say this, but I got a journal rejection recently. And, usually when we get journal rejections, we get mad. And the only thing I can think about was I got a book coming out on this. and I also thought about the big advance I got from the book. I was in the house that I bought with that big advance. And I'm but I want a house with this. It's somebody thinks I got a project. So it's that kind of thing. It's even the small disappointments you realize in the greater scheme, you're blessed. right? The fact that, we have jobs, we're blessed. And so I'm going to do something with that blessing and be a blessing to someone else. And that's the greatest scheme. This is more than a job to me. I'm grateful for the job. I'm grateful that I can make money doing what I do, but this is much more than a job. I'm on some other stuff. I'm about purpose. I'm about leaving a legacy. I'm about writing work that people can understand, that can touch their life or do something about their life. I'm on some other stuff. And that's the thing that keeps me going.
Yeah. First off, we are sorry to hear about your mother. But if you say she is who she is, we could tell she's speaking to us right now. And you are 100% representing the legacy of your community.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it just is the case. And I know she, I don't like to speak on speak for people, but I know she's proud. Like,
thank you for that.
Because if I had a daughter like you, I would be proud also.
Thank you.
100. I like this idea, and I want to leave with this to some extent, that either way, we're leaving a legacy. What type of legacy do you want to leave?